2011 has been a great year for gaming, with a large number of highly anticipated titles finally reaching store shelves. In addition, the 2010 holiday season had done extremely well, and business looked good going into the new year. Across the board, it seemed to be smooth sailing. But as it happened, in the first few months, gaming would undergo one of the worst attacks in its history, simultaneously showcasing the strengths and weaknesses of the industry. If there was ever any doubt about how big interactive entertainment has become, it was washed away by the events of 2011. It all started right away. On January 2nd, the renowned hacker George Hotz, better known by his alias GeoHot, released the code for the root keys to the PlayStation 3. Armed with this, anyone could make any program look legitimate to the PS3. In other words, anyone with the know-how could make their console do anything, from running Linux to playing pirated games. It was like having the secret password. As long as the program had it, there was no way for the system to tell that it wasn't supposed to be there. And Sony didn't like their secret in the open. Sony quickly filed a lawsuit against GeoHot and ordered various websites to take down the links to the code. Of course, this hardly mattered since the genie was already out of the bottle. The problem for Sony was that if they changed the root key, it would make everything incompatible, including legally purchased games. So for a few months, the PS3 system was completely vulnerable, although programmers would argue the system was completely open. It took until March for Sony engineers to find a way to invalidate illegal programs while keeping legal games working. All in all, it was a horrible and embarrassing event for Sony. They had no idea that this was a walk in the park compared to what was coming. But in the meantime, the industry as a whole pressed ahead. On January 11th, DC Universe Online from Sony Online Entertainment released. The game took the popular MMO formula and brought it into the world of Superman and Batman. Players could create their own superhero, complete with their own costume and powers. And the combination seemed to work pretty well, as DCUO went on to become SOE's fastest-selling game in its first week. Interestingly, while the MMO genre has generally been considered PC only, this game was on both PC and the PS3. And after the first week, 52% of sales were on the console. On the 25th, Electronic Arts released Dead Space 2 from its Visceral Games studio. A follow-up to what is widely considered one of the best horror titles in years, Dead Space 2 once again saw hero Isaac Clarke exploring a monster-infested vessel in space. And this time, he even talked.
How you doing?
Most critics agreed that the sequel surpassed the original, making Dead Space one of the premier horror series in the world. It sold 2 million units in 3 months, 40% better than the first game. At the same time, EA's biggest rival suffered a blow. On February 10th, Activision shuttered their music games division. This meant that Guitar Hero, once a phenomenon of the industry, would not be seen store shelves again. It had been a remarkable journey. After being acquired by Activision for $100 million in 2006, the franchise went on to gross an incredible $2 billion over the next 4 years, including $1 billion for Guitar Hero 3 alone. But Activision released too many Guitar Hero games too soon, and in only a few years, the market for these games collapsed. Additionally, in March 2010, Activision revealed that 70% of their revenue came from Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, and Guitar Hero. One of those 3 pillars is now gone. This puts tremendous pressure on the other 2 as time goes on. The rest of the month saw a number of releases, including Marvel vs. Capcom 3 from, of course, Capcom, Bulletstorm from developers People Can Fly and Epic Games, and Killzone 3 from Guerrilla Games. Coming nearly a decade after the previous game, MVC3 had a huge reputation to live up to. While the actual gameplay was considered tight and fun, the amount of actual content on the disc was very small, making many question why the game cost a full $60. Bulletstorm, meanwhile, failed to find much traction at all. Despite garnering mostly positive reviews and being a wildly creative and over-the-top experience, the game never reached profitability. Still, Epic was proud of People Can Fly's efforts and said that they look forward to working with them more. By contrast, Killzone 3 was considered by most critics to be the best entrant in its franchise and one of the best shooters available on the PlayStation. Despite this, by all accounts, it seems that it has sold less than Killzone 2, putting the future of the series into question. But the biggest release for February was the new handheld console from Nintendo, the 3DS, in Japan on the 26th. It would come to Western shores a month later. Its predecessor, the DS, had been a mammoth success for Nintendo. It was expected that the 3DS, with the ability to show 3D images without the need for special glasses, would be a monster on the same level. Unfortunately, while the system sold well, it didn't quite meet Nintendo's expectations. 2 months later, Nintendo announced that the 3DS had just missed their target of 4 million units sold. This was on top of drastically reduced Wii and DS sales compared to the previous year, making for a 66% drop in revenues for Nintendo all around. Where the Japanese company had formerly been printing money, it now seems that they have hit a rough patch, at least for now. The 1st of March brought attention back to the PC, with the release of the MMO Rift from Tryon Worlds. Rift debuted with quite a bit of fanfare, with many critics citing it as one of the strongest MMOs to come out in some time. And indeed, it managed to snag 600,000 subscribers in fairly short order. Unfortunately, those numbers started to fall in short order. BioWare's newest RPG came on March 8th in the form of Dragon Age 2. The first Dragon Age had split audiences, with some gamers loving its slower, more methodical approach, and others quickly getting bored. Dragon Age 2 tried to spice up the experience a bit by making the combat much more fast-paced. Not surprisingly, this once again split audiences, as some people loved the new direction, while others missed the old style. It did go on to sell 2 million copies, however, proving that the franchise does have a significant following. The Ides of March got stabbed by samurai and North Koreans alike, as Shogun 2 Total War from the Creative Assembly and Homefront from Chaos Studios released. The latest entry in the long-running Total War series, Shogun 2 aggressively streamlined the gameplay back to its roots, resulting in what many consider to be its finest iteration yet. Homefront, meanwhile, was publisher THQ's attempt to get in on the modern-day shooter craze. Marketed mostly with its single-player story written by Red Dawn creator John Milius, in the end the campaign was panned by critics. But to their surprise, the multiplayer was actually considered pretty good, and gained a decent following. A sequel is currently in the works. More bullets were fired on the 22nd from Crytek's Crysis 2, which brought the popular PC franchise to consoles. It kept the series' reputation of being a graphical powerhouse while also being a more deliberate and thoughtful shooter than its competition. It went on to sell 2 million units, making it one of the major success stories of the early year. But on the 24th of March, news came that shocked the gaming world to its very core. Duke Nukem Forever had been delayed. Yes, for one final time in its 14-year development cycle, DNF was pushed back from May 3rd to June 14th. The month closed out with an actual surprise, though. Major retailer GameStop announced that it had acquired both Impulse and Spawn Labs. Impulse is a service that allows gamers to download and play PC games and developers to access a networking backend for their titles. This is seen as a direct response to Valve Software's Steam service, which does much the same thing. While Valve never divulges numbers, it is believed that they make hundreds of millions of dollars from their digital distribution service, all at the expense of retail stores. GameStop, fully 7 years after Steam debuted, is finally coming up with a response. Spawn Labs, meanwhile, is a streaming content service under development. This almost certainly means that GameStop will stream games soon, so that even players with Wii computers can play AAA titles. Going into April then, everything was pretty calm. On the 11th, Sony quietly announced that they'd settled their lawsuit with GeoHot out of court. So Sony was finally out of the woods. What could possibly go wrong now? Somewhere between April 17th and 19th, a hacker or group of hackers broke through the security of both the Sony PlayStation Network and Sony Online Entertainment. Sony did not detect the PSN hack until April 20th, and did not detect the SOE hack until May 2nd. Sony took the PSN service down completely on the 20th, meaning no multiplayer could be played, and no games could be downloaded. On April 21st, Sony stated that it might take, quote, a full day or two to restore services. 5 full days later, with PSN still down, Sony held a press conference in which they admitted that personal information had been stolen from PSN subscribers, although critically, credit card information had not. Still, names, addresses, and purchasing history were now in the hackers' hands. With 77 million PSN customers, this makes the breach one of the largest in the history of cybersecurity. The sheer scale of the hack drew attention from governments and media from around the world. If nothing else, it proved to the mainstream just how powerful a force gaming had become. 77 million people is a gigantic user base for a single service. Sony, for its part, took a beating from everyone, including no less than the United States Congress. In particular, its decision to wait a week before informing the public caused an outcry. Sony responded that the full extent of the hack had not become clear to them until a week had passed, but once it was, they informed their customers immediately. While all this was going on, Sony then became aware of the SOE hack. In this hack, credit card numbers were stolen. Sony estimated 12,700 cards were taken, which is a scarily specific number. In response to this, SOE services were taken offline as well. On the 15th of May, PSN services began to be restored, and over the next few weeks, everything was brought back online with what Sony promised were far better security controls. The identity of the hacker or hackers remains a mystery to this date. Sony has said that the attack was very well planned and expertly executed. This was likely a professional cyber gang who had been plotting this out for months rather than a lone teenager lashing out. It became one of the most publicly watched hacks in history, and in fact, seems to have set off a rash of copycat hacks around the industry. The size and power of gaming, often underestimated by the mainstream, has now very clearly been brought out into the open by those who wish to abuse it. And that was only the beginning of the year. As 2011 continued to develop, it would see more big releases, more bad news for powerhouses, and the end of the longest game development cycle in world history. Tune in next time for all that.